This book is perhaps the most devastating look at two characters just obliterating each other. It is immense emotional violence just permeates this book.
Did you have the same thought, like, Gillian Flynn, who hurt you? Like, were you thinking that? Because I was like, you're going to the depths of your soul, I feel, for some of this stuff.
Yeah.
And I don't want to say that she's gone through similar situations, but you could see extrapolating from like an awful relationship and extrapolating something like this out of that.
Welcome, friends, to episode 174 of the Ink to Film podcast, where we read the book and then see the movie. I'm Luke.
And I'm James.
And this week we discuss Gillian Flynn's 2012 thriller novel, Gone Girl. All right, I am brimming with opinions. I'm so excited to talk to you about this, James. But I do want to establish some ground rules here at the start of the episode. I do think we're going to hold spoilers until after we get our general thoughts out, after we talk about the writer a little bit and talk about her process, because there is like there's massive spoilers in this story, and I think it is possible that people are going to be checking out this episode with no prior knowledge, wondering, is this a book I should read? So just for a little bit at the start, I want to speak to those in particular. What did you think of this book in general?
I mean, I first reaction just I love it. It was awesome. I really enjoyed the experience. I don't feel like I read a lot of like mystery novels, or haven't historically read a ton of mystery novels, and I would say this is sort of a mystery. I don't want to spoil anything, but it's like a mystery.
Yeah, so, no, I mean it's considered
with elements of,
it's considered crime, it's considered mystery, thriller, psychological. Like there's a lot of genre pinnings you can put on this, literary.
Yeah, and reading something from Gillian Flynn, I immediately was thinking about Sharp Objects when we started this book, and maybe it's because I'm not super steeped in this genre, but it feels to me like Gillian Flynn has like created a genre to herself within sort of like a subsection of these types of stories. It's like very dark, very atmospheric, unique characters that don't really fit an archetype of what you would, I guess, in my opinion, consider to be in a story like this. They tend to be very it tends to go there, is what I mean to say. Like she swings for the fences, and a lot of these characters, you're like trying to buy into the good things in the character, and you're trying to see like how you feel about a character, and then your feelings might switch on a dime, and it's a fun journey. And I'd seen the film, so I kind of knew what to expect, but I didn't remember all the specific details. But yeah, overall just a really, really fun story, and I blew through it. It was just a great read.
That makes me happy to hear. I am in love with this novel. I adored Sharp Objects. I remember just loving that coverage and saying I really wanted to read more by her. And she's 2 for 2 now, for sure, for me, because this was fantastic. As to what you're saying about her kind of creating her own genre, I don't know, but definitely she's got her own voice that I think is extremely distinct. And that voice, I think, she uses to write extremely believable characters, especially the women that are often multidimensional, far beyond the sort of intrinsically good women characters that we see so often in fiction. And she's talked about how that's one of her goals is to show women as being capable of all sorts of things, and there can be darkness there, and a lot of authors I think shy away from that, and I just love that part of her writing. I think it's fantastic. And yeah, I think she's one of my favorite writers right now. And she's only got 3 novels out. Dark Places, I think, is the only other one we haven't read. And she's done some TV work, done some writing on that Utopia show came out, which I didn't see, but I should check out because I just love her work. So I'm excited, and I hope she has another novel coming out soon, because I'll be excited to see what happens with it. Like, it's going to get adapted. I mean, look at the track record, 3 for 3 on those. Just incredible.
I think you're hitting on what I was talking about by saying, like, specifically, like very complex, very real characters. And I don't think it's a spoiler to say that like I don't like any of the characters in the story, but I love this story.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Like all these characters are awful, but it creates such,
the deeply flawed, just
so it creates such drama and tension, and the things that Gillian Flynn is able to come up with for these characters to have go through their minds. And some of the things the characters are saying ring very true, but then they're also, and so you're like, oh yeah, I understand where you're coming from, but then they do something outlandish and you're like, holy shit, like I'm not on board with this. I wasn't expecting this.
Yeah. So I'm not going to give away any of the twists or anything, but I do want to just lay it out a little bit as a pitch to like, why would someone want to read this book, should they be interested? This book is perhaps the most devastating look at two characters just obliterating each other. It is immense emotional violence just permeates this book.
Did you have the same thought, like, Gillian Flynn, who hurt you? Like, were you thinking that? Because I was like, you're going to the depths of your soul, I feel, for some of this stuff.
Yeah.
And I don't want to say that she's gone through similar situations, but you could see extrapolating from like an awful relationship and extrapolating something like this out of that.
There is probably some truth to that, but also just the ability to, imagine and empathize with people who are in these situations. And she writes Nick Dunn incredibly well. And I was seeing some people asking her questions about it, and she said that she like really identified with him. And I was really impressed with the empathy she shows for every character, in my opinion. Like they're all, it all feels like pieces of her when you're reading them. No one character to me stood out as like, oh, this is nothing like Gillian Flynn. This is a complete fabrication. They all felt like little pieces of her like writer soul, just being bared for us. And the more I looked into it, the more it's like a lot of the stuff in here is very personal to her. And she's got a lot of her own personal history wrapped up in it. And so I think this is one of those situations where, we're seeing a writer who is like bleeding on the page. And
wow.
that's really tough to do. And I mean, I think Sharp Objects is another example of that from what we saw. It's like, people talk about this in writing circles a lot about like being emotionally honest and writing not only what you know, but I was just at a retreat, and Daryl Gregory gave like a presentation. He was on the podcast for Watchmen. And I was listening to him, and I don't remember if he was quoting somebody or this is something he came up with, but he said, don't just write what you know, or don't only write what you know, but write what you feel. And that's a way to be just honest with what you're creating. And I think that is on display here.
Now I feel kind of bad for saying like who hurt you, because like maybe she, if you're saying that, like I hope she didn't go through any of the traumas that she talked about.
She appears to be happily married with 2 children. I was reading like at the very end, she has acknowledgments where she's like thanking her wonderful husband and how he like gave her all these insights, because she was like asking him like really personal questions about what it's like to be a man and all this stuff. So apparently that helped a lot with the writing male characters. So I will give her the benefit of the doubt and say it's all imagined, but there's kernels of truth in there. It's just like it's impossible for us to know what they are, and maybe that's the best way to go about it. So before we get into, I'm gonna tell you a little bit about the writing of this novel and some quotes she has about it, but I want to start by reading the opening to this book, because one of the other things at this retreat we talked about a lot was, this is the Rainforest Writers Retreat, by the way, run by Patrick Swinson.
And he went virtually, just
yes,
to address that.
Thank you. Yes, it was a virtual this year. I do try and go every year in person. This is like one of my favorite things. But one of the things we talked about was openings and endings. And this is something that I think about a lot, and I feel like this is an area that I really want to address in my writing. And talking about how openings have to like hook you, but they also have to be, really important ways to sort of encapsulate the story. And a really good ending can also like resonate back to the opening often. There's no rule that says they have to, obviously, but I just want to read this opening, and then like knowing what James, having read the whole book, kind of looking at what is just in these opening couple paragraphs.
And I do want to say real quick, I do think that when we're going to get to the film, but I do think that the film opens and closes in a similar way. I remember being very distinct and thinking like, I think this is Gillian Flynn's words in the film.
We're gonna talk about it, but she wrote the film. I don't know if you know that. She is the screenwriter of the film. So
that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, when we're going to talk about an adaptation that's probably going to be like very close, we're going to have that. Oh, I should also, you mentioned how you saw the film and didn't really remember a lot of it. I also saw the film. I think I saw it when it came out, so that would have been 2014, and I haven't seen it since. So while I did remember some of it, a lot of this was lost through the haze of time and my bad memory. So a lot of this was still felt fresh and new to me. You know, I did know a little bit, but that's also one of the reasons why we chose to cover this in 1 week. I think this book would have really lent itself to like a 2-week coverage, but that would have been best if we had never seen a movie for it. You know what I mean? But because we had already seen the movie, I think we both kind of felt like just knock it out in 1 week because, you know, I don't know. Maybe it would have been better that way, but we're doing it this way. So hopefully that works. Anyway, here's the opening to Gone Girl. This is Nick Dunn, The Day Of. When I think of my wife, I always think of her head. The shape of it, to begin with. The very first time I saw her, it was the back of her head I saw. And there was something lovely about it. The angles of it, like a shiny, hard corn kernel or a riverbed fossil. She had what the Victorians would call a finely shaped head. You could imagine the skull quite easily. I'd know her head anywhere. In what's inside it, I think of that too, her mind, her brain, all those coils, and her thoughts shuttling through those coils like fast, frantic centipedes. Like a child, I picture opening her skull, unspooling her brain and sifting through it, trying to catch and pin down her thoughts. What are you thinking, Amy? The question I've asked most often during our marriage, if not out loud, if not to the person who could answer. I suppose these questions storm cloud over every marriage. What are you thinking? How are you feeling? Who are you? What have we done to each other? What will we do? So, having read the book, looking back at that opening paragraph, or the opening couple of paragraphs, is pretty incredible in how it really does. Like, the ending resonates with that. It really sets you up for, like, what you're about to get into, right? Like, we're going to explore these thoughts. And the inside workings of Amy's mind, in all of its weird passageways, I think is also very important. So I just love those opening paragraphs.
Yeah, amazing. And then it's called, not only is it a callback at the end, is it a callback to this, but there are also like references throughout to like, Nick does find her. I think he finds her multiple times, like by the back of her head or something like that within flashbacks. And I think that the flashbacks did a lot to like, I love like a disjointed narrative, right? Like something that's like jumps all over the place a little bit. And this does, because we keep jumping into those flashbacks. It does a lot to build, without spoiling anything, sort of resentment that's like slowly creeping in. And what goes on with the skull, and for spoiler reasons, I'm not going to say anything else, but like things that happen or seem to have happened throughout the novel, and how it calls back to sort of this first paragraph.
I guess we should set up a little bit of like what the premise is. So essentially this is the premise of the book, is that Amy Dunn, Nick Dunn's wife, has gone missing, and we are about to get a collection of two narratives. One is the diaries of Amy recounting them meeting each other, and then one is like Nick in the days following her disappearance. And it is set up like a sort of recognizable whodunit, like what happened here mystery. And that's where it begins. And then it just goes to like awesome, unexpected places, in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely.
So if that sounds good to you, I think it's clear that we both highly recommend this novel. Let's talk a little bit about the writing of it. Now, in the past, we talked about one quote in particular that I want to revisit in Sharp Objects. And this was Flynn talking about writing women, because some critics have accused her of being a misogynist. And this was sort of why she talks about why she considers herself a feminist. And she says, One thing that really frustrates me is this idea that women are innately good, innately nurturing. Flynn also said people will dismiss, quote, trampy, vampy, bitchy types, but there's still a big pushback against the idea that women can be just pragmatically evil, bad, selfish. In 2015, Flynn explained her decision to write cruel female characters, saying, quote, I've grown quite weary of the spunky heroines, brave rape victims, soul-searching fashionistas that stalk so many books. I particularly mourn the lack of female villains, good, potent female villains. So I think that's fascinating to consider. Just it is like a career sort of. It seems to me like this is permeating her writing, which I think is really fascinating.
Well, and I do I tend to agree. For what it's worth, I think like to not write a character like this because it's seen. I think it's kind of misogynistic to think that you can't write women like this. In my opinion, like it would be to say that they are specifically something that we've deemed they are. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Which, like, full caveats, we're not necessarily the right people to speak on this,
right.
But
which is why I said for what it's worth.
Yeah, for what it's worth, which may be very little to you, listener. That's fair. But no, I mean, I tend to agree with you too. Like, ultimately, if you're labeling women as only capable of inhabiting certain roles in a book, you're putting them in boxes that is innately like, yeah, it's misogynistic. It's not perceiving them as fully realized people, and so it's not ultimately good. Even if like some people might think they're trying to sort of like protect women by doing that, that in and of itself is kind of a problematic way to look at it. I don't know. Smarter people than me could probably break this down better, but that's my thoughts on it. So let's talk about Gone Girl, though. Flynn said that she was inspired to write this novel by the disappearance of Californian Lacey Peterson in late 2002. I don't know much about the Lacey Peterson story. I skimmed over a little bit of it, which is surprising because I actually do read and listen to a lot of true crime stuff. But I hadn't really heard a lot about this. The name sounds familiar. Like maybe I heard about it in the news back in like 2002, but I wasn't super familiar with the story. But anyway, apparently that inspired sort of the setup of this book. She also said that portraying her principal characters as out-of-work writers, she made use of her own experience being laid off from her job as a writer in Entertainment Weekly, which we talked about last time.
If there was going to be something I pointed to that felt like something that Gillian was pulling from in her own life, it was like being in writing circles in New York, potentially, or like writing for, entertainment. That felt very like... I mean, a writer writing about a writer, typically, they're pulling from some sort of experience.
Have we ever encountered that before with one Mr.
Once
Stephen King?
Twice, yeah,
or
maybe.
A few others, I'm sure. Writers love to write about writers. About the book, she said, quote, I liked the idea of a marriage told as a he said, she said story, and told by two narrators who were perhaps not to be trusted. Flynn has also described marriage as, quote, the ultimate mystery. Now, you are not married. I am. And I think people who are married are going to find this particularly interesting because there's just a lot. It can make you like scared of marriage and be like, I don't know if I should get married to people. It can make, and I think like honestly, it's a cautionary tale about especially getting married for the wrong reasons, and how really terrible a decision that will always end up being. And I think she does a great job of laying out a lot of the ways that it can go horribly, horrifically wrong.
Don't rush into things is sort of like what I've taken from everything. Really, really know the person. But I remember when this movie came out, people were like, don't go see it with your significant other. And like, I'm
really?
like, what kind of relationship are you in that you can't see a film with someone and like realize that like it's a story being told and it doesn't have to be your life?
It is the anti-love story. In many ways, it is, the polar opposite to even like Scott Pilgrim that we covered last week. I made the joke at the end of the episode about how dramatically different this book was. And it really
but
is.
Like, I don't know. To me, it's like, that's a red flag if you don't want to see it with your significant other.
Yeah. Like what are you worried about? Yeah. I agree.
Marriage and society and the pressures that people feel from it, I think, it can definitely lead to some of these things. Mm-hmm. But just, maybe if you're not happy in your relationship and you can't go see a movie together, that's a reason to think, is this the right relationship for me? I don't know. I don't know.
No, I agree with you. you should, you got to be able to weather watching a film together. Otherwise, what are we talking about? We're starting to dance along some spoilers here, but so if you're really, really a spoiler phobe, check out. But this is very light. But I wanted to give this little bit. So Flynn has written an autobiographical essay that was titled, quote, "I was not a nice little girl." And in it, she invites readers to believe that she took inspiration for Amy Dunn from her own interior monologue. In that essay, Flynn confesses to sadistic childhood impulses like, quote, stunning ants and feeding them to spiders. A favorite indoor game called, quote, Mean Aunt Rosie followed Flynn to cast herself as a witchy caregiver who exercised malevolent influences over her cousins. The same essay argues that women fail to acknowledge their own violent impulses and incorporate them into their personal narratives, though men tend to cherish stories of their childhood meanness. So I want to track down this essay because I'm fascinated. Maybe between now and next time, I'll see if I can find it. I don't know if it's going to be behind a paywall or not, but we'll see.
Yeah, it sounds really interesting. One thing that stands out to me is I don't know what it says about me if I am that sadistic, but making bugs fight it's not that sadistic, right?
I mean, it means you're a serial killer, so just admitted that on a podcast.
Not animals, just insects. I remember having catching little lizards and stuff, and trying to get bugs for the lizards to eat.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not necessarily proud of it, but I definitely remember taking a magnifying glass to an ant or something, back in the day. It's like a science experiment at that point, and I was a kid. I didn't empathize with an ant. I would have difficulty doing that now, to be fair. I've seen the Ants film, and yet.
Yeah, right.
Anyway, I just thought that was interesting, right? She obviously has given a lot of thought about how women are portrayed and has something she wants to say. And I commend her for that. So Gone Girl was number 1 on the New York Times hardcover fiction bestseller list for 8 weeks. It was also 26 weeks on the National Public Radio's hardcover fiction bestseller list. Culture writer Dave Itzkoff wrote that the novel was, accepting the 50 Shades of Grey trilogy, the biggest literary phenomenon of 2012. By the end of its first year in publication, Gone Girl had sold over 2 million copies in print and digital editions, according to the book's publisher. Massive best-selling hit of a book. And a kind of a cultural sensation. And that reminds me, I think this book is, you hear that cliche, people say, oh, I want to write the next great American novel. Yeah. I feel like this is kind of a great American novel because it is also quintessentially American. It is all about this period in time, this Great Recession, 2008, after the housing bubble burst, and there is the destitution of people losing their jobs and losing their homes and financial insecurity, that permeates everything. And then we're talking about a married couple, and their struggles. So it's very American, and it's set in Missouri. So you get this kind of small town, but it's also set against New York City, the big city life. I just think it kind of fits that. And even though it's an incredibly dark, emotionally devastating novel, it also kind of fits that mold.
I think so as well. Yeah, I think it's fitting for where the progression of America. This is along that path. I think this could be considered a great American novel for sure. It was also the turning of social media becoming so important, and the turning of the internet and what the internet did to print. And a lot of that kind of stuff too. So comments being made on that, which what's weird to think about is this is kind of a period piece now. This is kind of
but it's also a lot about society and how people were judged in the jury of public opinion, and how that just affects everything, and it'll even affect the outcomes of cases sometimes, and how that has to be managed. The optics of everything is just it's all brilliantly done. And I got a lot more to say, but let's get into some plot synopsis. We're gonna let's talk about what happens in part 1 of this novel. So we will be spoiling each section as we go. So fair warning. All right. Part 1. The narrative alternates between the point of view of Nick and Amy Dunn. Nick's narration begins shortly after arriving home on his wedding anniversary to find Amy is missing. There are signs of a struggle. Amy's narration comes in the form of her diaries and follow the early stages of their relationship. The diary entries describe how she met Nick in New York City, where they both worked as writers. After 2 years of dating, they married. In 2009, both lost their jobs following the Great Recession. Amy's parents, also facing financial issues, asked Amy for assistance. The couple relocated to Nick's hometown in North Carthage, Missouri, to take care of Nick's sick mother. With permission, Nick used what remained of Amy's trust fund to open a bar with his twin sister Go, and also works as a college lecturer. Amy describes how she hates being a housewife and resents Nick for making her move. Her diary comes to portray Nick as an aggressive, moody, idle, and threatening husband, and indicates that she fears for her life. In Nick's narrative, he views Amy as needlessly difficult, antisocial, controlling perfectionist, and an unwelcome obligation, but is concerned about her disappearance. Nick becomes a suspect in the investigation and faces intense media scrutiny, exacerbated by his lack of obvious emotion and apparent flippant attitude. Investigators discover that Amy was pregnant. Nick has serious credit card debt, which he claims to have been unaware of, and Amy's life insurance was recently increased by Nick, which he claims was her idea. It becomes apparent to Nick that his wife had secrets from him. Okay, so part one, we get these two different narratives, and this was a part where I was taken by the structure of this novel. I was enamored with it. Like, I love the idea of chronologically, we have Nick's story, which begins at the disappearance and then goes to the days following. And then we have Amy's story, which is beginning way before and sort of moving up towards the disappearance, and filling in some of the gaps. But both are clearly being told from very specific points of view. I think at this point, we can tell that, like, we're getting both sides of it here. And we see how, like, a lot of the stuff that Nick is saying doesn't seem to line up with the stuff that Amy's saying. And I think, the reader is going to believe that Nick is looking more and more guilty here. Gillian Flynn does a masterful job of, like, planting little things in here where he, like, has images of seeing her with her head bashed in, and he clearly is hiding something from the reader. Like, he's clearly, like, not explaining certain things that he would have full knowledge of. And he's like lying to us, which makes us doubt him and start to question, like, did he actually do it?
He sucks, right? Like, Nick sucks. You're buying into the fact that, like, oh man, like, what a brutal thing to happen. Like, this like perfect wife was abducted seemingly, or something's happened to her, and then, like, you're more and more things keep happening where you're like, are we getting this perspective of the murderer? Mm-hmm. Are we getting, like, because the husband always does it. Yeah. It's always the husband. Yeah. Which, of course, and then, like, even knowing some details of the story, like having seen the movie, like I'm like, having to readjust what I'm like, did Nick do it? I'm trying to remember, was he involved?
We've seen so many versions of stories where, like, somebody did it and then they, like, dissociate from themselves and they think they didn't do it, but maybe they actually did. And so, like, yeah, you're kind of expecting, like, are we going to get some sort of reveal that he secretly did kill her and all this stuff, Because
he is being secretive. And honestly, like, both parties are kind of unreliable because, well, I guess at this point he's unreliable, and it seems like it's more.
She seems more reliable, right, at this point.
Yeah, because and I like what you said about the format, because really he seems unreliable, and then the diary feels like gospel because it was written so long ago,
and it's told us that it's a diary, like right, like the idea is that a diary is written for no one else to read. We sort of hold diaries sacrosanct as, like, they are people's inner lives written only for themselves. And so if we're somehow reading a diary, it is very specifically the authentic experience of somebody. And so we're set up to just buy everything that it says, which is just a brilliant move. I absolutely love it. Let's talk about some of the major players that we get introduced to here. We get Amy Dunn's parents. They are really something else. They are pieces of work. They are
hilarious to me. I was laughing so much.
Yeah, I mean, they're these, like, they wrote these books about their daughter and got famous and rich off of them. And they're both child psychologists. And like I can't even imagine, like, the way she describes it is just like it's going to damage you so much to have these parents. And how they would write this version of their daughter that was perfect, and, like, publish it and like compare her to it and hold her to that standard. It's amazing to me that that people who are like child psychologists would not realize what they're doing to their own child by doing this, but it's believable.
In my opinion, what was going on was, with the success of the novels, they were in denial of what it would do to a child because it was successful and they were making money at it. And later we see they're sort of irresponsible. I mean, maybe not irresponsible, but they fall on hard times. And
they're affected by the bubble, but then also their book sales, plummet.
Right.
And Gillian Flynn is laying some groundwork here, and we don't even realize she's doing it. But she's laying groundwork for a emotionally abusive childhood for Amy that is going to form her into the person she becomes. And that person is not okay. And we don't see that because we hear about this through Amy's perspective in her diary. But we learned that that's unreliable. And so even though I think a lot of it is true, it's actually maybe not even given to us with the full weight of just how bad it was. So I think it does a really good job of setting the groundwork for, like, she was fucked up by her parents growing up. I think it's clear. Which doesn't excuse everything, because a lot of people do get fucked up by their parents and then are fine. But, so often you look at people who do horrific things, they often come from broken homes where they were abused or different things like that. I listen to enough true crime stuff that goes back into the past of different, like, serial killers. It's pretty consistent. Yeah. I feel like let's talk about some more characters. So they're all incredibly well done. I really like the twin relationship with Nick and his sister Go. I think it's really smart to have Go be a woman and to have Nick. He has this, like, kind of weird relationship with her that is a little bit off-putting, I think, to most people at first, where they're like really sort of affectionate and close with each other, and they do the dirty jokes with each other, and it's kind of like off-putting, I think. But again,
I think it's kind of a real thing.
Yeah, like, it's kind of endearing too, right? And to me, it's good to see Nick not have a really toxic relationship with at least one woman. Like, it seems to be fairly healthy, although we do get the implication that he's hiding something from her. But still, like, I think it helps because Gillian Flynn also has to walk the line with Nick, right? Like, she wants us to suspect him, but we can't out and out hate him, right? Like, because I don't know, like, you have to empathize with him enough to where when part 2 comes around, you're going to be able to make kind of a flip a little bit.
Well, he's a very buyable everyman. American everyman, right? Like, specifically, like, Midwest.
Yeah,
American.
I guess. And it's interesting because I love one of the major themes I was picking up on throughout this book is the lies that we tell ourselves, the lies that we tell other people, especially in long-term relationships and marriages, about how, like, the true self starts to come out over time, and how you kind of put on an act before, and then this is all stuff that's baked into it, but also the lies we tell ourselves about the people we want to be with. And Amy is, as much as she is, like, seems to be so self-aware in her diary, making fun of all these other women and how they, look at men, she falls in love with the ideal of what she wants Nick to be, not what he actually is. And I think that's so true. Like, so many people do that, and she falls into that trap too, because, like, she has this almost, like, she has this really awesome cool girl rant that she goes on, and we're about to get to in part 2, where she's like, just blisteringly making fun of these cool girls who are, like, being the fantasy for these guys. But what's ironic is that she kind of has that exact ideal that she wants from Nick. She wants him to be, like, a feminist, but also, like, this, like, super machismo guy, and, like, super capable in some ways and emotionally available in others, but also not too emotional. And, like, if you start to box in all the, like, parameters for her perfect man that she thinks he is, you realize that no actual person can fit into that either. It's like, it's almost her own version of the cool girl label, I guess. But,
and I mean,
for a guy.
the cool girl thing cracks me up too, because it's like she's setting herself up as saying like she's showing her true self eventually. She's saying like, you know, I was a certain person when me and Nick first started dating, and now, you know, time has passed and I'm not going to be that person, because that was just basically to start to you know, to get him in the first place.
She's not above it. She even talks about how she's played the cool girl many times, and it's interesting when she's because she talks about how she is like a chameleon here in part 2, and you know, her personality can change, and you're immediately like, wait, what? Isn't that the thing you were railing against a minute ago, like being inauthentic? Exactly, yeah. And I can't remember the specific name that they have, but it's like the men who are like at the beck and call of their wives or whatever. Yeah, you're right. And but that's what she wants, right?
Exactly.
Like, she is she consistently does that. Like, she makes fun of it. She talks about how like silly it is, and I don't have to be worshipped and all this stuff. But like, that's exactly what she wants. Ultimately, at the end, that's what she wanted. Yeah, and she wants to completely control him. To like, they were making fun of people who were controlling their husbands, and she wants to fully control her husband. Yeah. She so often is becoming the thing that she's making fun of. And it's so interesting because this first part, Diary, is a lie, which we're about to get to. But we don't know how much of it is a lie. And she says that some of it is true. And so, it's never like really broken down and litigated. Like, certain things here or there, but like for the most part, I think it's just up to the reader to try and figure out what of that beginning is true and what of it is a complete fabrication. And I do assume, like, my own personal take on it was that I do assume some of it, like a majority of the good things, because that's how relationships go. The beginning is great. Everything's great in the beginning. But it's interesting, though, because she wrote it, we're about to get to, she wrote it later, and she went back and was like, what was I thinking 7 years ago? And recreated it. Yeah, that's true. You know, and from her, like, current mindset. So she was crafting it very deliberately to set up a certain narrative. I don't know. It's really fascinating. So let's get to part 2, since we're referencing it a lot. We're about to get the big reveal, right? So let's just get into it. Part 2. It is revealed that the main characters are both unreliable narrators. Nick has omitted that he is cheating on his wife with Andy, his former student, and intended to divorce Amy. He hid this from investigators to avoid suspicion. Amy's narration shifts to the present day, revealing that she is alive and staged her own disappearance to go into hiding. After discovering Nick's affair, she became angry at his disregard for her and planned extensively for a year to fake her death and frame Nick as revenge for wasting her life. Her pregnancy, years of diary entries, and other evidence were fabricated in order to incriminate Nick. Nick becomes aware of Amy's plan based on vague clues that she has left for him under the guise of their traditional anniversary treasure hunt. He is led to Go's woodshed, where he discovers exorbitant purchases Amy made with credit cards in his name to further incriminate him. The shed also contains Amy's anniversary gift of Punch and Judy puppets, one missing a handle. Let's actually stop for a minute here. I have a little bit more for part 2 summary, but I want to get in on the reveals first before we get into like everything else that happens in this part. The reveals. I think the reveal of the Andy infidelity is actually a little bit into part 1, but I think the summary lumps it in the top of part 2. But anyway, the big reveal that happens for sure at the start of part 2 is that Amy's alive, and that she completely fabricated the diary. I remember losing my mind because my first experience was the movie theater, seeing it in the movie theater, and I just remember losing my mind, being like, oh my God, it's all fabricated. And then the way that it's doled out to us for the rest of the story is so, I mean, it's so meticulous. It's so detail oriented and well plotted. It's amazing. Yeah, incredible. And you know, the structure continues to be amazing. I love the way it swaps between the two of them, and it situates you in time. The way that she is like gleefully like we are her gullible victims in this. Yeah. We are the general public. We are the viewers of the Nancy Grace show, or whatever the name of the stand-in character they have on here. We are like at her. She is manipulating us into doing the very thing she wants the general public in this book to do, and that's hate Nick. And she knows exactly how to do it. I think I was, even knowing the story, I was on her side longer than I'm willing to admit. You know? I was still like kind of like, it's kind of justified for a while, Yeah. Up to a certain point. Well, and that's because it kind of is. And one thing that I also loved was when Nick comes clean about his infidelity, it's actually like the most cliche, like cheating on a wife you could have, right? Like she's way younger, she's a student, you know, she only knows him in like a certain way, and she sees him as this great writer, and he appeals to his ego. And one of the things that I kept thinking about was at this retreat I went to, Tobias Buckell gave a presentation about narrative cliches. And one of the things he talked about, and many things that was great, but one of the things he talked about was one thing you can do to make a cliche work is to just fully lean into it and explore it in such a way that nobody could look at it and say that you are faking it or you're just borrowing this like common thing and placing it in your book. That you fully explore it in a way that actually makes it seem fresh. And she does it here. Like I bought this. I bought why he did it. I bought the things that he wasn't getting from Amy in their marriage and why he would turn to her. And I love how he was also like self-aware enough to go like, I know you're going to hate me. I know that she's a cliche and like all these reasons, but here's why, you know, and like, you know, their relationship had gone cold. You know, he wasn't getting any of the emotional or physical or anything. He wasn't getting anything out of it that he needed. And he ends up turning to her and he talks about all the reasons why. And you still end up like hating him for it. But I thought it was presented in a way that made the cliche work and made us at least empathize with the character enough to understand why he might do it.
Yeah. I mean, I can see that for sure. Some of the time, I think cliche is laziness, right? So it's like, oh, I'm going to lean on this cliche because it's the easy way to go. I don't have to work hard for it, and it's like
low-hanging fruit, right? Like you just reach out. You're like, what do I need? And you grab this fruit, and it happens to be something you've heard a million times.
Exactly, and the audience is on board with it. They know they can follow along with it very easily. But like we said, there's nothing lazy about the way that Gillian Flynn does it in this story, right. So it works. The other thing is, I don't know what character says it. I want to say that it's Amy, but I can't remember if it's in a diary or like a later chapter. But she basically talks about how like he must have known that like he was faking himself to Andy. So ultimately, like he's not going to when she understands and knows the real you, she's not going to be interested in you anymore because like that's not exciting to her. What's exciting is the best foot forward that you've put, and like there's nothing that's ever going to come of this. And so to do that in this relationship and like, you know, I think, you know, it's clear at the end of the story that both parties are in the wrong, but one maybe a little more than the other because of the extreme, like the extremes that are taken.
There are no heroes here. Let's just say
exactly. But it is funny to think like it is irrational, but he was reaching out for that companion. He was reaching out for someone because, as we learn, there was something sort of manipulative going on with Amy at this point. Like, there's a reason why she was like cold and distant and all of this, because she felt that that's how their relationship had, you know, played out, and that's what it had become. So she's already like putting all this into effect, basically, I assume, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. The timeline isn't exactly clear to me because she finds out about Andy really early on. I think the first time, right? Like she sees it happen. So she obviously is going to turn cold after that. And she starts plotting this for over the course of like a year.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, obviously they had problems before that. And but we're told about it from two unreliable sources. So it's impossible to know like what is actually true. And both sides paint themselves as not being that bad and it mostly being the other person's fault. Right. Which is so true to, I don't know, so many things. And I like what you were talking about with how Nick, he is putting out this version of himself, this lie, and it's the lie that Amy fell in love with. Yeah, she points out and others point out, like, as soon as that lie becomes the truth, you're going to get bored, or you're not going to be getting what you want anymore. You're going to feel like, you're going to feel like judged, and you're going to get restless. And that's so true for this kind of guy. I don't know.
And I mean, that's ultimately why these two characters never should have been together, you know?
Yeah, I mean,
because
clearly,
the pattern has been realized.
Or maybe they're perfect for each other. I think there's a debate that we had there too. So we also got to talk about the pregnancy thing. Finding out that she faked her pregnancy is like a bombshell to me. The way she like stole this neighbor's urine and used it because she's pregnant to pass a pregnancy test. And honestly, it's just the tip of the iceberg, and it starts to lay out the diabolical way that she like systematically framed her husband in an inescapable way, honestly. Like, and it's terrifying. It's like the access she has, the trust she has, her ability to dismantle his life piece by piece is incredible, and she fully does it here. Like, and it's diabolical, and it puts her up there to me with like other incredible, like, villainous minds that I've gotten in fiction. Like we read Silence of the Lambs, and I think about Hannibal Lecter, and I think she is a lot more human in many ways than Hannibal Lecter is, but like just as far as like a absolutely incredible villainous mind, it's right on, it's up there. Like it's she is incredibly brilliant and devastating, and you know, doesn't give a shit. Like, it's amazing how much she can find every little way in which she can just punish him. And I think at one point it said Old Testament, and that's how it feels. Like, she is getting incredibly brutal in her punishment of Nick.
Yeah, and from every angle, like you said, inescapable.
Yeah.
Like, if this falls through, well, that's not that big of a deal, because there's this other thing that's gonna be like just an avalanche on him.
It's almost magical, but she's thought of it. It's like Sherlock or something. Like, she's thought of everything that you could possibly think of. Yeah.
Of course, like I'm not going to say no one could ever do this, but because clearly Gillian came up with this stuff, but you know, it's like it's supernatural in the narrative.
Well, I will give away a secret. Like, as a writer, you kind of cheat because you're God. You control it all, so you can just make it
pulling
work.
all the strings. Yeah.
No, you have to fool the reader into believing it, but ultimately it's a magic trick, right? Like, of course.
Right.
Okay, so let's move on to the rest of this part 2 section. So Amy's plan to observe the investigation through the news is foiled when she is robbed at a motel she's hiding in. Desperate, she seeks help from her wealthy ex-boyfriend, Desi Collins, whom she had a manipulative relationship with in her youth. Desi, still enamored, hides her in his lake house, but becomes possessive and controlling, making Amy feel trapped. Nick and his new lawyer, Tanner Bolt, work to change public perception of Nick through an interview with a popular talk show host, during which Nick pretends to be apologetic for his infidelity and failing as a husband. He is well received, but the police have discovered the woodshed, which also contains violent porn videos, and Amy's diary, which chronicles abuse from Nick. The police find the missing handle from the puppets bearing Amy's blood. Nick is arrested. At Desi's house, Amy sees the TV interview and is impressed by Nick's performance of a perfect husband, and is convinced that the two of them uniquely understand and are matched to the other. She mutilates her own body so that it appears Desi has been holding her captive before seducing and murdering him. Okay, so someone does die in this book, and that's Desi, as he gets taken out by Amy here, just a brutal way. But I love that bit of the summary, because I absolutely agree with that. I love that she sees him lying on TV, and we know it's a lie. Nick knows it's a lie, but everybody else, society, looks at it and thinks it's true. And she like kind of falls back in love with him because she sees this lie and she's like, yes, that's the lie I want. So now I'm going to come back to him, which is another crazy turn that I did not expect. You know, it's like you do not think that's going to happen, that these two are going to somehow get back together. Yeah, but incredible turn there.
Yeah, and with all of that going on, Nick is like, he up to this point, he had like fallen apart. Like, his entire life had fallen apart. He was full on the suspect. They were going to nail him with all of it. And she comes back and saves him, and then uses that against him eventually and says, like, you were fucked without me. Like,
we're about to get to that. That's in part 3. But in part 2, I actually really love how the structure shifts to this contest, right? Like, it's Nick trying to get the upper hand of Amy, and then from her like remote place where she's watching it all unfold in the past plan she's laid, like springing little things on him and things happening unexpectedly, and like him trying to stay ahead of public perception. And I thought it was, again, like a fun setup and a fun narrative to follow. And you think it's like, who's going to get the better of who's going to get arrested. Like, it feels like that's where it's headed. You know, one person's going to win. Nick is going to absolve himself, and you know, we're going to find that, and he's going to make sure everyone knows what she did. and that's not where we're headed either, right? So it's another feint in a way that I think is masterfully, performed here.
The way that I'm starting to feel bad for him at this point in the story, right? Like he fucked up and he shouldn't have done what he did, but just like empathizing with a person who clearly he didn't commit the murder. Like we're sure of that at this point.
And he's potentially going to face the death sentence, right? So yeah, clearly this is a little bit too far.
Yeah, and it's so inescapable, like we've talked about. It's just like sometimes people get caught in cases that they didn't do and then convicted of them, and like that's something that happens within the justice system. And it's like, not a perfect system, but used really effectively by Gillian to be like, he's at his complete lowest. So for her to come back is his only out.
Yeah, I mean, just the idea of the woodshed and how she crafted that, and fills it with all these purchases that seem like it's going to be this like great man cave for him, and then fills it with this like extremely violent porn to make him seem like this like violent guy. And I don't know, it's so well done. And again, just like she perfectly knows what to do to turn everyone against him, to turn the police against him, to turn public opinion against him.
Something that I actually feel like we haven't talked enough about too is the whole, like, we talked a little bit about Amazing Amy, or Amy, like the character that her parents are writing.
Yeah.
But this idea that like she had become the person she is because of the expectations based on this character. And the way that the public is also reacting to that, because they're like seeing her as the character that her parents created, and they're so sympathetic to her cause, and they're just the way that like the family kept interacting, and the conferences kept getting worse and worse, and then the friend coming out who like she had framed as like, this is my best friend, and she spent time with these people.
Yeah, and she told her that, and it's all lies. It's lies all the way down. It's just like an incredible web. And lies, like there's so many different kinds of lies. Like you're talking about like the things that like society wants to see people as, even if like people know she's not actually Amazing Amy, right? Like they see her and know that, but they want her to be that, and she wants for them to see her that way. So it's this like mutual lie that each side is telling each other, and it's the same way that the marriage can sometimes be, and definitely is in this case, where it's like it's just these shared perceptions and roles that people want to fill, and even if you don't fill it completely, you're gonna like act like you do. I don't know. It's incredible and really fascinating. But I love the idea of the true crime aficionado, particularly women, reading this book and seeing Amy as an empowerment story, right? And in the same way that like other problematic male characters are often that way for people. Like you see like Walter White, people, like even though in Breaking Bad, Walter White is clearly a villain, he's also a hero, and he, at least begins that way. And a lot of men identify with that character and find him empowering and think like, oh, that's so cool, right? Like I think she is that way. And one of the reasons that I think she speaks to people so perfectly is Gillian Flynn knows her audience. She's writing a crime mystery novel, and I bet there is a huge overlap of crime mystery fans, thriller fans, and true crime fans. And this person is her whole getting the whole crime she's doing, she's able to do because of her love of true crime. So if you're a woman listening to this, you're like, ooh, I could do this. I know a lot about crime too. And who do I hate that I could really fuck over if I wanted to?
Definitely.
It's like a thrill, right?
Definitely. I mean, and like being someone who doesn't, the only time I consume it, so my girlfriend is a massive true crime. It's honestly like a huge portion of her entertainment. And well, that's the thing is like,
she could Gone Girl you, man.
True crime's been a thing for a long time, but I think it's really come to prominence in the ways that it has now, to where it's like everyone's true crime fans. But when I was first being exposed to some of the true crime stuff, I'm like, doesn't this seem like ways that like a serial killer could watch this stuff and use this to their advantage to then get away with things? And like, it was always explained to me like, no, like it's better to tell these stories so victims can, we can remember their stories and understand what happened, so that hopefully it doesn't happen to other people, and on and on.
I think both things can be true. I think it's like what outweighs the other, but yeah.
this is the scary turn, right? This is like taking that and being like, the people who can get away with it are the people who consume it constantly, that consume this sort of stuff.
But ultimately,
I think you're right on. Like,
ultimately, like, you still would have to be a killer or someone, you know what I mean? Like, you still have to be a sociopath to do this, and maybe you would have done it already, but maybe you could just do it better because you've studied this stuff. I don't know, but you know what I mean? It doesn't take good people and turn them bad.
It was a fear of mine that Gillian Flynn like specifically pinpointed and was like, all right, let's go in on that.
Yeah. I don't know. I just think it's brilliant. You know, it's like she knows her readership so well. And I think it's one of the reasons why this book did so well. One of many, but like, I think it was an empowerment. I think women read this who are this kind of reader and go like, oh, you got to read this because they know people like this, right? Like, you got to read this book for this reason. And, you know, I mean, best-selling, massive novel. So I don't know. I think that was a piece of it at least. All right. So let's get into the final part and then we can kind of just talk about everything. Part 3, Amy returns to North Carthage, where Nick is recently out on bond. She fabricates a new story to investigators that she was kidnapped from home and imprisoned by Desi before killing him to escape. Her diary entries were melodramatic, and she is glad to be back with Nick. Nick, Detective Boney, and Go know that she is lying, but have no proof. Nick is forced to return to the married life with Amy as the media storm dies down. Amy begins writing her memoir of the fabricated events, and Nick privately begins an expose of Amy's deceptions. Amy uses Nick's semen, which they saved at a fertility clinic, to inseminate herself and forces him to delete his book by threatening to keep him from their unborn child. Nick complies, dedicating himself to the role of a perfect husband. Ooh, she... like a spider, you know, I think she's described as being spider-like to him. Her web closes on Nick here, and he can't get out. He's trapped, and but that's what she wants, right? Like, she wants, you were saying, you know, early on in the episode, absolute, total domination and control of him.
The ending is... never did I see this ending coming when I first consumed this. The fact that he's like, this is the ultimate nightmare. It's like, not only... because he's like constantly like fantasizing about killing her when she finally comes back, and that, you know, that calls back to like the open her skull and, you know, see inside, and like he's like actually thinking that at this point. And then she gets him with the ultimate hook at this point. Like, there's nothing that he can't possibly get out of it. She had a trump card ready to go. Yeah. And ultimately it was, I'm pregnant with your child. And he's like, how is this possible? And then like the idea that she saved his semen, and then eventually like she used it against him, and like he's trapped in the situation.
She knows he wanted a kid, and it's just like, it's amazing. And
to protect the kid more than anything. Like,
and she is so aware throughout of a particular power she has in society. I think that's one of the really fascinating things about this book too. It's like, for great, you know, there's great reason that we always give women the benefit of the doubt, right? Like in these situations, and that, you know, the vast majority of cases, you know, there are no false rape accusations, for example. Like, it's in the vast majority, it's very low percentage, but it does still happen sometimes. It's a very low percent, but it doesn't never happen. And I think Gillian Flynn's pointing out that, like, in the right diabolical mind, it can be used as a weapon, because she full on knows how public perception is going to be. And she knows the power of accusing people of certain things and how loaded that is in our society. And if she has no shame and she's willing to just say anything, then she knows exactly what'll happen to Nick's life. And I also love, like, we get examples of her doing this to other people throughout her life, right? Like that friend from childhood, that guy that he goes to talk to who she accused of date rape, but then like withdrew the charges, and just to like teach him a little lesson, and like all these little like brutal things.
Well, and then that guy even mentions like, Nick's like, why didn't you press charges? And he's like, I just wanted it to be over. Like, I just wanted to be free of her. Yeah. And there's no out for Nick. And it's just crazy how the flip is it is a complete 180, because these are characters that you feel like, for Nick, I was like, oh, you kind of deserve it for a really long time. But up until the very end, I'm like, oh, wow. Like, this is like completely, like, now I do feel bad for him in ways, you know, like he's certainly not blameless, but he's learned his lesson maybe, but at the same time, like, I don't know.
He's in this perpetual hell. And I wanted to say We talked about, I think last week, about the happily ever after in romance novels and how that is this like great expectation for that genre. And this is the, life of agony ever after, the despair ever after, depression ever after. I don't even know, hatred ever after. It is the complete opposite of that. And
I love that.
And it's going on in perpetuity. It feels like inescapable.
Another layer to that too is that while he's trapped and staying for the child, he's also living with a murderer, like a known. He knows that she and she's willing to kill someone.
Yeah, he keeps thinking about how he cannot turn. He's like, I cannot turn my back on my wife.
I love that. I love that detail.
And
too,
imagine he's gonna have to do that forever, like until she dies or something, or one
forever.
of them dies.
He can't shut his eyes. Like he was like one of the first night that he stayed, he's like, I'm gonna go sleep downstairs. My immediate reaction was like, that's not good enough, man. You're still gonna get your throat slit while you sleep.
Yeah, and we talked before about how she one of the many things she did to frame him was she would come and like press his fingertips on objects to plant fingerprints and shit. So being asleep, you're vulnerable. How could you sleep? It's just a living nightmare, and that's gonna be his life.
I think he might even mention like, I'm never sleeping again.
Yeah.
I think that's a line that he has.
And it's so crazy too, because both of them, Nick to a lesser extent, but Amy too, like they're able to find something in this fake relationship, right? Like he talks about how he catches himself sometimes and has to remind himself of the reality.
Yeah.
Because people get caught up in the lies that they tell themselves. And all Amy cares about is perception. Like she wants other people to look at her life and be jealous of her, amazingly hot. He's gentle when he needs to be, he's manly, and like he's all these conflicting things. And as long as everybody sees that on the surface and sees him being devoted to her, it's okay if he secretly hates her. Like that, it doesn't matter to her, which is incredible because it's like the polar opposite of everything we were led to believe at the start of the book.
Mm-hmm. The status is another thing that we didn't talk too much about, but like the idea of status within the story. So Amy goes from a character that is rich with a rich family, living in New York, change of status into living sort of a domestic wife role that she detests, and then the change in status again to her having nothing, no money, on the run. And then she's robbed, and that was actually one of my favorite sections of the story, when she's like hanging out at the hotel in like the Ozarks or whatever.
Yeah, it was a really interesting like class moment, right, where she like underestimates these people, and that's something that I think if you were to look at another reason why Amy is unable to be happy, is because she fundamentally looks down on everyday people as lesser.
Well,
lesser
both characters are. I kept thinking how pretentious both characters are
for sure.
consistently throughout the whole novel.
Yeah, but especially Amy.
Right.
And I think she like completely has no respect for these two people that she meets in the Ozarks, and ends up like not even believing that they could possibly get like one up on her, and then they do, and they rob her, and that ends up making her have to go to Desi. But yeah, really interesting sequence, and it shows how she is the spoiled rich kid, which is what she gets being, they keep labeling the Amy that's on TV as that, and I think that really hits home with her, because she definitely is. And I don't know, it's again, it makes it feel like this like really perfect American novel in a way, because it really talks about like how classes are here, and elites, and all that stuff.
Yeah, another interesting dynamic was Desi, when Desi was sort of her caretaker, when he was taking care of her but also trapping her there, and the ways that she saw him and what he represented. Although he's well off, like he has a lot of stuff going for him in life, but he's also like he's too easy for her. He's too attainable, and he's also like, why isn't he what she wants from Nick? Right? Like, I think that's interesting to explore. Well, there's not enough fight in him, is basically what she says at one point. Like,
which later on she says that Nick has this new spark that she really likes, and it's that he fucking hates her now.
It's so crazy. So wild.
Yeah, but no, I think that's part of it, right? But I think there's more too, right? Like, I think it's that she wants to be real with somebody, and she wants to be seen. And one of the reasons she loves this new relationship with Nick at the end And I think it's shown beautifully in the scenes where they get into the shower together and literally strip naked to confess to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And they bear each other, they bear themselves to each other, and it's the first time maybe ever that they've been truly honest with each other. And she likes that she can finally be truly honest and fully seen by Nick, and then yet he's still trapped to be with me, because Desi is very clear that he considers her like some sort of princess that needs to be kept in a tower and given a little garden, and she has this pink room, and so he has also got this idealized version of her that he wants her to be, that is not true to what she really is.
There's also the oh shit moment when she realizes like Desi isn't what she actually thought. Does she, like, when he has the ever blooming flowers or whatever, that he's prepared for her, she was like, oh shit, like I didn't realize how much he was obsessed with me.
Yeah. And I think that's where the plan actually takes form too, because I think she immediately latches onto that and goes, I can use that, because as soon as that is shown, like, that's something she can't plant. That had to have been there all along, and it's definitely creepy.
Yeah.
So she's really good at like finding things and then immediately incorporating them. But I want to talk about also the audacity. The audacity of her coming back is another moment of like, it's like Walter White again, like, some of the shit that he gets into in later seasons, the audacity of it all, standing toe to toe with these kingpins and stuff like that. Like, the audacity of her walking back in onto her life and like daring the cops to ask her a question that she doesn't have an answer for. Like, she just is like, I know, I have an answer for everything you could possibly ask, and I'm not afraid of you.
And anything that you think seems like it's kind of sketchy, I'm going to use the fact that I'm a victim in the situation against you.
Yeah. Who are people going to believe? And there's all these questions about like, well, why did this happen? Well, you'll just have to ask Nick. So like, she keeps turning, the whenever there's like ambiguity, she turns it back on Nick, who's created, he cheated on her, so he's not going to be viewed as someone who's trustworthy. Right. I don't know. It's just amazing. And, I think there is some implication of like, maybe at some point she'll slip up. And I think that's what Nick's hoping for. But the clincher is the child. And he calls off Boney and says, I was wrong. She's, I'm just going to try and make this work now. And that's devastating. That's like the final acceptance of his living hell that he now is going to be in. Yeah.
And his final folly really was the fact that he thought that he could write this book that would be her downfall, and that she wouldn't have another answer for it. Like, he actually thought he was going to have to be able to get something over on her. And ultimately she dropped the ultimate bomb on him. She was just like, boom, well, go ahead and delete that book because I'm pregnant for real.
Yeah. One thing I didn't ever really buy that she was going to kill herself. She says that she has this plan to kill herself, and then she changes her mind. And I was like, really? I just didn't buy this character would ever do that. I'm not saying it's necessarily criticism,
which is probably why she didn't.
Maybe it's just like, would I buy that? Maybe she would have a fantasy that she was going to do this. Sure. But just as like a final fuck you to like deliver the body and really seal his fate, I guess. But I like that she didn't really go very far down that line of reasoning, because it didn't really make sense to me. I kind of thought where we might be going was that this was going to be a second diary, and it was going to be, because I didn't know if this was like, because it felt like a diary still, it felt it was written in the same way that her diaries are written. It just was more truthful. And I was like, oh, is this a second diary where she wants to like take some credit for what she's done, and yet she's going to like falsely say that she's going to die? Because I honestly didn't really remember exactly in the movie. Again, I have a bad memory when it comes to stuff that happened 6-7 years ago, apparently. I was wondering where that was going to go, but that's not where it went. And I'm glad that it didn't go that route, because ultimately where it ended up going was way more unexpected and way more interesting.
Yeah.
There is one part where he's talking about how she is his forever antagonist, and we are in one long, frightening climax. And I thought it was very meta. I like that they're both writers, so that they can like make these kind of comparisons, but I also thought it was just interesting from like a, critical analysis point of view to think of that, how, he is in this forever relationship with his antagonist every day, and every day is going to be this horrific climax forever. It sounds terrifying.
This is my hope, that one day when the child is old enough to go out on its own, 18-year-old, 19-year-old, 20-year-old child goes off, then he just goes and disappears into the wilderness or something and can have some peace.
It's funny you talking about the kid. It reminded me, at the very, very end, there's an acknowledgments section where she like thanks a bunch of people, and she talks to her husband. And one thing I thought was funny is she talks to her son. I think she has 2 children now, but in the book she talks to one of her children in particular and says, if you're reading this before 2024, stop and go read something else. Or, and I assume it's because it's probably 18 or something in 2024. So I think it's funny that like she's telling him, I hope you don't read this, because like if you were like 10 and you read this book that your mom wrote and it was this, geez,
yeah, for real,
you'd be worried, man. I don't know. I just think that's interesting, right? Like and like that's why I give so much credit to her too. Like there is a bravery to writing a book like this, because you're going to open yourself up to like so many things. People are looking at your personal life and the people like imagine like your parents, your husband, like how are they not going to see themselves in these characters and go like, is this how you really think of me? You know what I mean? Like
that's every writer runs into that a little bit.
This is what I'm saying. That's why it's interesting, right? Like, because like this is always a worry that you potentially have, and so much of this is like familiar to her life. Like she was a magazine editor. Like she's from Missouri. I don't think her parents wrote children's book, but I don't know. You know what I mean? It's just like so many things where I feel like you could potentially get into uncomfortable situations with real people when they read your work. But that's the stuff we sign up for, right? We don't sign up to please our grandparents when we write these books. So that's how it goes.
Yeah, I feel like also once it was a massive success, all questions are off.
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
well, you made plenty of money, so okay, it's all good.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to say that we have a guest lined up for next week. Fingers crossed it works out. It'll be a really interesting new perspective on this material. We're going to be talking about the film David Fincher, which I think is a filmmaker we have not touched on yet, right?
Yeah. I'm a big fan of David Fincher. He's a very meticulous director.
And incredible. I'm excited to talk about him because I'm definitely a big fan. If you enjoyed this episode, please let us know in the form of a rating and review. We haven't gotten any on Apple podcasts in a while, and I would love to see those numbers go up. We've been hovering right at 75. Let's get us to 100, right?
Make sure to connect with us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, all of those at Ink2Film. We
also have a book club on Goodreads that you should join because we talk about different books on there, and it's cool.
If you wanted to support the podcast in another way, we do have a Patreon. It's patreon.com/Ink2Film. We have many different tiers, but our $2 tier gets you into our bonus content. We release an episode every month. We're up to like a lot now, 30 something.
Yeah. We just did The Heretic 2. No, Exorcist 2, Heretic. There we go. Something like that. The Heretic? I don't know. It was a weird fucking movie. It was bad.
Yeah.
And we react to that. And we wanted to thank Ross Bugden for the use of our intro and outro music.
All right, I'm excited to get into Fincher. Fincher is notoriously a filmmaker who, I think it's been said a million times, but he can do everything on the set. He's sort of a cinematographer, DP, writer. He's everything on set. So he very much has like a strong handle on the things that he's creating. So I'm very excited to get into him.
Cool, man. Yeah, I'm excited too. Excited for our guest. And until next time.
Thanks for listening.
And I just wanted to get one final word in here just so I can have the last word. So that's a reference to the book. I just felt like I deserved it.